I live in a small town just outside of Canada's capital city of Ottawa called Manotick. It's a lovely little place with many heritage buildings, one of which I'm currently sitting in while writing this down. I grew up in Ottawa just down the street, so I was very familiar with the city from a young age. It was a common school field trip destination as it had a famous local attraction, the Watson Mill. I remember going for tours of the mill as early as grade 3. The mill serves as the heart of Manotick and hosts many local events. It's open every day for the public to tour, and you can walk across the old stone-controlled dam which harnesses the running waters of the Rideau River to mill grains. The mill and surrounding historic buildings are dedicated to educating the public on the history of the area. They even have people dressed in the garb of the 1800s who will take you on little tours and answer your questions. Our house is just down the road and is part of the local historic tour. Weekends bringing a lot of yuppies on strolls through the lovely neighborhoods, especially in the fall when Canada is at its most magical. The Watson Mill is a famous haunted destination in the Ottawa area. Newer management of the mill has made efforts to sweep the spooky from its history, but the tragedy that occurred in the mill can't be erased. The mill is the home of the ghost of Anne Courier, and this is her story. Joseph Courier was a native of North Troy, Vermont. He had known his fair share of sorrows as an 1855 tragedy struck when all 3 of his children died within 5 days of each other. Just 3 years later, his first wife passed away, leaving Joseph a broken man. Seeking solace, he traveled to the serene waters of Lake George, New York, and checked into the Crosby-side Hotel. It was there, amid the tranquil setting, that Joseph met Anne Crosby, the tall and radiant daughter of the hotel's proprietors. Anne's beauty and warmth rekindled a spark in his heart, and before long the two were married. Their love carried them onto a honeymoon across the northeastern United States, filled with hopes of a brighter future. By February of 1861, Joseph was now a co-owner of a new grist mill in Manotick, Ontario. And wanting to share his pride and joy with his young bride, the mill, a marvel of its time, had just celebrated its first anniversary, so he brought Anne to see it, eager to show her the fruits of his labor. But on a cold winter's night, Anne wrapped herself in flowing garments and toured the mill with wonder in her eyes. The machinery whirred and clanked around her, a testament to Joseph's success, no doubt. But in a tragic twist of fate, her elegant white flowy dress became caught in the spinning turbine equipment, and in a horrifying instant, Anne was thrown violently against a support pillar, where she perished on the spot, leaving Joseph utterly devastated. Grief-stricken, Joseph could no longer bear the sight of the mill, and he sold his shares to his business partner Dickinson and left Manotick forever. Anne was laid to rest in Beechwood Cemetery, Ottawa. But Anne's story didn't end there. Locals and visitors alike claim her spirit lingers in the mill to this day. They speak of bloodstains and fingernail marks etched into the post where her life ended on the 2nd floor. People report feeling a sudden chill and the unmistakable sensation of being watched in the spot where her life came to an abrupt end. It was as if Anne never truly left. As you can imagine, locals know this story, as we've heard them as children when we visit the mill in the fall on field trips. There are conflicting reports as to what actually happened to Anne, with a family friend writing back to England at the time, claiming to have witnessed her death and that she was thrown into the machinery and torn to pieces before their very eyes. The old groundskeepers of the mill have reported second-story windows, long sealed shut by age of lack of use, flying open in the middle of the night. Countless reports of sightings of a young woman in the window or hearing screaming or crying can be accounted for. When you visit the mill, you can walk right up to the spot where she died and touch the post where she supposedly hit her head on. It can be a very eerie place when you know what has taken place there. They used to do haunted sleepovers in the late 90s and early 2000s. I had a friend go as part of her girl group activities, and they were all scared silly over the experience. It's a lovely spot during the day and I highly recommend it. But now onto my house and my personal experiences. As I said, I live in one of Manatic's heritage homes that is older than Canada has been a country. My family bought this house several years ago, and every owner can be traced back since it was a cabin in the middle of nowhere built to shelter the original owner. It has served many uses in its lifetime, including the local doctor's practice. It is bizarre to think about sometimes, as people lived and died on an operating table in the room I watch TV in, with their loved ones eagerly waiting in the next room, which is now our powder room. There is no doubt that people have moved on within these walls. That is an easy assertion to make of any dwelling of a certain age, but it is particularly noisy here at times to those who are sensitive. It feels a bit like a crowded waiting room, and other times it's much more like snapshots of moments long past. I wouldn't say there are specific people left behind, but there are fragments, impressions of the many people who have come and gone. But on the very rare occasion, there is an oppressive atmosphere that gives us the heebie-jeebies. This strange phenomenon is what I'll focus my story on. I'm not overly fond of upstairs. I've had most of my creepy encounters up there, as it is the least updated area of the house. The room I used to sleep in with my baby girl is the worst in the house, and I hate to sound cliché, but the closet was the reason. It's old with a heavy door that you really have to work at a turn and open. Despite the fact, it will swing open violently in the middle of the night, or as you're walking past it in broad daylight, completely at random. For example, one night a few months ago I had put my daughter to sleep and headed downstairs with my baby monitor to watch TV with my family. I have the monitor on her at all times, and it's always in my line of sight. So we're chatting and watching TV, and I see the sound in her room goes off, but I hear nothing. There's a pause, and then my daughter, from a dead sleep, lets out an ear-piercing scream and begins to wail. She continues to scream at the top of her lungs as I rush upstairs to comfort her. She's only ever once done this in her life, and it was when she was very, very sick, so obviously I'm concerned. As I get to the door and push it open, I am overwhelmed with fear and dread hanging on my shoulder. It felt like the entire space to my right was a giant dark cloud of terrifying. It's like that feeling you get when you feel something is behind you, but it's on my shoulder. My daughter is now sitting up in bed, screaming and crying, facing the corner of the room I'm recoiling at, pointing at nothing I can visibly see. Can you guess what happens next? The closet busts open across the room in the dark. Motherhood trumps all, so I rush to bed, jump in with her and hold her tight to me. I rock her back and forth, shushing her gently as I sit in the dark oppression. I feel that my fear is fueling whatever is happening, and the more I cower, the more powerful it becomes. Now, when I'm in a pinch in the middle of the night, as a new mum, I've taken to calling on my grandma who passed away in 2020 to ask for help. It's often my last-ditch, desperate, sleep-deprived plea to my ancestors when my little one has a fever or won't settle. I know it's very dramatic, I know, but parenting is hard. Anyway, I bring up my grandma and then my husband's grandma, and I ask my family to watch over us and to please help me out. I'm sure other mothers listening can relate to this feeling, but when you're holding your children, you feel such a powerful love. I think it empowers you to be brave. I was once told that envisioning a white light radiating out of you will help repel bad spirits. And in this moment, reflecting on my beloved grandma while holding the creature I loved most in the world, it became an easy thing to do. The oppressive feeling goes away, my daughter calms immediately, and falls asleep peacefully. I go downstairs to my in-laws and husband, clearly shaken by what has just transpired. They immediately ask what happened, to which I begin to tell them exactly what I just told you. But before I can finish, my mother-in-law asks if the closet door opened. Turns out she had had many experiences in that room, but didn't want to mention it, as I was sleeping in there and she didn't want to freak me out. Thanks. She has spotted dark figures upstairs on numerous occasions, and since she bought the place, she has had many injuries. I've actually lost count. She'd fallen down the stairs on multiple occasions, has slipped doing the simplest things, and I'd never consider her a clumsy person. But this old place has definitely left its mark on her, paranormal or otherwise. I had taken back up sharing this story after several days, as something strange happened while I was getting the last paragraph out. As I started to ruminate on the bad energy in this house, I began to feel it again, right over my shoulder for the first time in months. Of course, I'm writing a spooky story at 2 a.m., so the heebie-jeebies are a consideration. And just as I'm feeling this way, my daughter wakes up screaming once again in the next room. Then I get a text from my little sister, who was sleeping over that night, upstairs in the room I don't like, asking me to please come up and that she was scared. The closet door swings open on her, and she could feel the same oppressive feeling. It seems that bringing attention to this entity empowers it to make an appearance. So now I'm in a mad dash to conclude this story before I conjure up another sleepless night for myself. Toddlers provide enough of those already. Personally, I think it's time we moved house. We moved back to our apartment complex where I had already experienced strange things before. My older brothers and I were in high school at this point, and my brothers, especially the youngest twin, would throw crazy parties all the time. There were always at least 13 people there whenever I got home from school, which drove me crazy. My mum was a single mum of 4 and always working, so we did whatever we wanted. One day, a group of my brother's friends decided it would be a great idea to play with a Ouija board in his bedroom. I wasn't there for it, but my mum was, and she told me later that the atmosphere in the apartment changed after that. My brother, who never believed in ghosts or anything remotely paranormal, began to experience strange things. He told us that someone in the group acted possessed, passed out, and saw a face appear out of the blanket on the wall above his bed. I wasn't there to witness it, but after that, the house just felt different. In my room, I felt uncomfortable. It was an eerie feeling, and I didn't like being alone. I had a dog that would growl and bark at my closet for no apparent reason, which only added to the discomfort. There was one particular day when I was working on a school project in my room, with my dog lying beside me, when I felt something staring at me. I didn't actually see anything, but my dog started barking and growling like something invisible was coming down the hallway towards us. I was frozen. My dog was going crazy, barking louder and louder, as though something was right in front of us. Then all of a sudden the barking stopped, and my dog's eyes followed something as it moved around the dining room. I couldn't see anything, but based on his reactions, whatever it was moved up the wall and into the corner of the ceiling before disappearing. The whole thing left me shaken. Another time I was unlocking my mum's bedroom door when I saw something in the reflection of the doorknob. A man standing behind me. He was tall, wearing a white doctor's jacket and had a black moustache. I screamed and ran out of the apartment, too afraid to look back. I was certain I had seen something, and it wasn't a figment of my imagination. A friend of mine who came over also had a strange experience. We were sitting in the living room talking about random things when suddenly everything on top of the fridge fell onto the floor. The thud was so loud and we both screamed, running out of the apartment until someone else came home. I moved to a different apartment years later, but things never got any better. I had a tall shelf filled with Harry Potter memorabilia, and at the very top was my sorting hat, which hadn't been touched in years. My dog, who had been calmed since we moved, started growling one day and fixated on the shelf. His hair stood up on end as he stared intently at the sorting hat. Then out of nowhere the hat turned on. I heard it speaking its phrases even though no one had pressed any of the buttons. I picked it up to investigate and realized there were no batteries inside. That especially really freaked me out, but I tried to brush it off. A few minutes later the hat turned on again, this time saying something different. I was so spooked I didn't know what to do. To make matters worse, I started experiencing sleep paralysis. There was one night in particular where I had a vivid nightmare. I saw a demon crawling down the wall, moving towards me as I lay in bed, unable to move. It watched me, and I felt utterly powerless. I started saying, "Jesus Christ," over and over in my mind, trying to wake up. And somehow, I finally broke free. It felt like the demon was studying me, trying to figure out how I was able to break the paralysis, and I've never been more scared. On another night, I saw something stranger still. There was this figure, almost like a plague doctor, dressed in a post-apocalyptic style clothing with a long-nosed mask. Its head was glitching, jerking side to side as it walked towards me with a needle in hand. I could feel it trying to prick my toe, and the sensation was so real that when I woke up, my toe hurt, even though there was no visible mark. Things didn't stop there, though. 2 months ago, my dog started growling at the shelf again, and the sorting hat went off as before. This time, I recorded it on my phone to have proof. I couldn't explain how or why this was happening, but it felt like no matter where I went, something was always following me, no matter how many times I moved or tried to escape the paranormal. It was as if I couldn't shake it. I don't know if it all started with the Ouija board, or if something more sinister has been attached to me all this time, but I've learned to live with it. That doesn't mean it doesn't scare me, it still does. I just try not to think about it, even though deep down, I know it's always there, watching. In 2012, my then boyfriend's parents purchased a house, and we moved in with them. I had been living with them all in an apartment prior to this for about a year, and all was well. The day of moving in, his mum suddenly turned against me, taking something I had said entirely out of context and adding onto it. Her husband and son didn't believe her, and she still, to my knowledge, holds a grudge about this particular event. This would be a repeating event for all three of us concerning her. He and I got married the following year. The next several years, his mum would continue claiming I said things and started retaliating against me in progressively worse ways. One day I came home and discovered something that was the final straw. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but we ended up moving out on our own in 2017 due to this particular event. And things got a bit better for everyone involved, until October of 2021. She claimed she saw people in the backyard messing with our classic cars. Police ended up being called and it turned into a big mess. We attributed it to some of the medication she was on. It worsened over the following months, to the point where she was now saying she heard voices and seeing people in different rooms of the house, notably the master bedroom and dining area/kitchen. There was a death in that family that resulted in my in-laws needing to move across the country, and my husband and I bought the house from them in May of 2023. Over the last year, our marriage struggled. There were various pressures which resulted in both of us drinking excessively, mine having started to get better after a traumatic event in 2020, and we spiraled. The events are as follows. My computer was set up in the master bedroom in a corner desk. There were many times I would go to turn the light on because I had this spooky feeling of something staring at the back of my head. The feeling didn't really go away, but the light made me feel better. I was gaming one day and heard this low, almost growling laugh from the closet on the far wall to the right. I'm talking about the stereotypical evil Tim Curry chortle that sent chills down my spine and is ingrained in the back of my brain. It just lives there rent-free like a monster under a child's bed. I would go to the bathroom and hear low, mumbling talking like it was coming up through the vent. I wondered at times if someone was living in the crawl space. This fear was compounded by the fact that the crawl space vents on the outside front of my home would sometimes be pushed out lying on the ground. This was an almost everyday occurrence. I'd come home and on the ground, they were there. We put this off as a raccoon or other critter because it was way too small for a human to fit into. The crawl space entry is padlocked. I had a small LED motion detector light in my closet, as the original hardware had failed. I'd be laying in bed at night, and the light would come on at random in the closed closet. No airflow to move clothes. I wouldn't even think the motion detector would be able to see clothes move anyway, but who knows on that one. I just turned it off, and when I needed it after several weeks of this, as it had no pattern and would happen after a few days of nothing. I heard a lot of voices while drinking and partaking in some novelty Delta 8s. I was a heavy drinker, and Delta Vapor through a lot of 21 while I dealt with personal issues. But I never had a problem with auditory hallucinations prior to living here, and have not had problems since leaving this house. But on Christmas Day, my husband attempted to chase whatever it was out of the house. I had left, so I don't know at all what he did besides sage the home. He claimed whatever it was demonic. I am hesitant to use that word, as there were a lot of things I witnessed that I never told him about. I wonder sometimes if he had other things happen but he never told me. I ended up separating from my now soon-to-be ex-husband at the beginning of the year. We were both dealing with a lot of stuff and the house seemed to make it worse. It definitely got worse at night. We would go out, have an amazing day and come back home, and the entire mood would fall apart. We've had numerous items go missing, little things like vapes or remotes. Some items would pop back up, others are still MIA. I've seen shadows move from the dining room to the kitchen, and we've had things get knocked off into the sink or off the counters. The feeling of being watched while in the shower was also only a feeling I felt in that particular house. My ex also said he's felt similar. Since January, we've been moving our things out of the house. Neither one of us are currently living there. Back in June, I went to get my computer after an odd event regarding the doors of the house. The front glass doors had been locked, while the back screen door was wide open. My neighbor brought up he was concerned about the screen door, as we had always kept it closed and never had issues with it being blown open due to weather. My friend I'm currently living with had come to help me move things that night because I was already uneasy about being alone in the house. We had already loaded up the computer, and I was in the process of dismantling my corner desk. He stepped out for a cigarette, and while I was undoing these fantastically frustrating IKEA locks on the desk, I heard a muffled but very audible male voice say, "Hey." It freaked me out, so I skedaddled outside and asked said friend if he had called for me. He looked confused and denied it. It still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. Every time my ex and I are over there, the feeling the house exudes is dread. I'm tense and tightly wound. I have to go over tomorrow morning and enlist a few close friends to go with me so I'm not alone. I refuse to be there alone. I don't scare easy, and even my ex has admitted he has severe discomfort about being there by himself. I was desperate enough to have someone go over there. I debated on calling the non-emergency line to have an officer oversee the situation. My in-laws both had issues regarding their marriage while living in the house. My mother-in-law even attempted to take her own life. The issues went away after they moved out, and apparently have been doing great since, though she still loathes me. My ex and I have also been doing better in our now separate lives. He said his depression is pretty much completely gone, as is mine. Even our dogs are doing better. We knew the previous owner was a bitter old man. I'm sure I could find his name somewhere if I looked, find if he's passed away or not. But I'm at a loss on what to do in the meantime of moving out before the end of the year. There's a part of me that just wants to get a spirit box or throwaway board just to see, as is human curiosity. I've seen some wild things over the years, having volunteered closely with a local mental facility known to be haunted, and even currently working somewhere where a lot of us have some stories, particularly those on the night shift. But this is the first time I've actually felt fear. Human ghost or whatever it is, I don't like it. I'm looking for advice. Any would be appreciated. My husband and I bought our 1916 Sears model home in June of 2019. I was so excited, as I love old homes the best, and wondered about all the haunts that could possibly exist. I even paid a whole $1 to a website that tells you if someone has died in your house. Nothing. I was bummed that no one had died in our new house. My husband was so relieved. Skip to November 1st, 2021. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to a text from a friend. She sends me a link to a local newspaper story and says, "Thought you might enjoy a little history about your home." In my sleepy stupor, I click the link and am greeted with a giant black and white side view of my house. In this story, I learn of Dr. Orville C. Walker, who had lived here with his wife and 4-year-old son in the year of 1921. He was awoken with an emergency house call in the early morning of Wednesday, September 28th. As he got up and made his way into his garage, our now home office, he was shot and killed. He was taken into his bedroom immediately, now my 15-year-old son's room, but was deceased. I had no idea. I skipped down the stairs, excitedly approaching my poor husband, who was washing dishes before he left for work, and said, "I have the most exciting news ever about our house." And when I told him that someone had lost their life in our house and it had never been solved, he wasn't as excited as I was. I showed him the article. Not only was it the front page of our city newspaper, but it was also the neighboring city's newspaper as well. After reading the article, my husband freaked out. As you see, the day he died was my husband's birthday. We then realized that the good Dr. Orville was murdered on Wednesday, September 28th, at the age of 33. My husband will be 33 next year, and I swear to God it falls on a Wednesday. And wouldn't you know, he turned 33 on Wednesday, September 28th of the following year. He didn't want to be home that day, but luckily everyone seemed to like him, so we weren't worried about any assassination attempts. With that all being said, any activity we have had always involved windows on our second floor. We always hear doors opening and closing, and footsteps down the hall. My dogs hear them and goes absolutely mental with excitement, thinking someone is coming downstairs, but no one's there. There's a window in our bedroom that we never open because there's no screen for it. That has been wide open before in the fall around this time of year. Our bedroom is full of dead leaves and freezing cold, and I hear music at night, incredibly faint from a radio. We've sat in our living room and heard the basement door in our kitchen open and close. His funeral was held in the parlor, our living room, and we contracted a gentleman who works at our local library and learned so much from him, as he had been researching the murder for years. Turns out that our doctor was not very well liked around here by a lot of the men in the area, due to his infidelities and willingness to perform illegal abortions, so there were many suspects. His family even suspects his wife of some foul play. We have stacks of court documents and newspaper clippings, and we plan to make a video about it one day. We did find his grave. He's buried with a simple marker in Cleveland's Lakeview Cemetery, with a great view of President Garfield's tomb and monument. No family nearby, just him. I was around 5 to 7 years old when this happened. At the time, I lived with my mom and my 2 sisters in a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. The house was next door to a funeral home, which always gave me an uneasy feeling, especially at night. I would see my dad on Wednesdays and Saturdays, but the rest of the time it was just us. I shared a room with one of my sisters, and whenever I woke up in the middle of the night, I'd always run straight to my mum's room to sleep beside her. I don't know why, but I was terrified of that house at night. Every single night. One evening after coming home from my dad's house, I decided to play a little prank. I crawled into my bed, panning to pretend I was asleep and scare my mum when she came to check on me. But as soon as I lie down, exhaustion took over me, and I passed out. When I woke up, it was around 1:30 a.m., and as usual, fear crept in. I bolted to my mum's room for comfort, but to my surprise, she wasn't there. I checked the living room. Nothing. That's when I realized she must have stayed the night at her boyfriend's house. Panic set in as I raced back to my room and dove under the blankets. Then it hit me. My sister, the one I shared the room with, wasn't at home either. She was staying over at a friend's house, and I was utterly alone. As I lay there trying to calm myself, I started to hear it. The unmistakable clanging of pots and pans coming from the kitchen. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze in terror. I immediately threw the blankets over my head, willing the sound to stop. The noise continued for what felt like an eternity, 10 full minutes of relentless banging. Desperate to convince myself it was just a nightmare, I pinched and punched myself all over, but the pain was real. This wasn't a dream. Finally, the noise stopped, and silence filled the house once more. Cautiously, I peeked out from under my blankets, and that's when I saw him. In the hallway directly across from my bed, a man was hanging in front of my sister's door. His head was obscured, but I could clearly see the rest of him. Black dress pants and polished black dress shoes. I froze, unable to move or scream, just staring in pure terror. Then, as if instinct took over, I pulled the blankets back over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. I don't know how, but at some point I fell asleep. The next morning I told my mum and sister what I'd seen. They were as freaked out as I was. 6 months later we moved out and into my mum's boyfriend's house. Now I'm 18, about to turn 19, and I still think about that night. I've always believed the man I saw was a spirit from the funeral home next door, given the way he was dressed. What's strange is that my friend's grandma lives in that house now, and she's never experienced anything unusual. But the memory will stay with me forever. My friend Zena lives in what is believed to be a haunted house, and after a long break, we decided to dive back into ghost hunting. It's been a while since my first experience, but I still can't shake the memories. It all started with a balloon in Zena's basement closet. We were using a spirit box app, and my friend decided to try the Estes method, where she listened to the box through noise-cancelling headphones while blindfolded. The only thing she muttered was something like, "Don't trust her." But when she came out of the trance, she had no memory of saying anything. For context, Zena's family believes they may have connected with 2 spirits during the pandemic, a boy and a girl, possibly twins. Part of me wonders if the little girl temporarily took over my friend during that session. We went into the basement, and I got this incredibly vivid mental image, almost like a story playing out in my mind. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, but there were things I couldn't explain. I don't remember the original story of the house, but names started coming through the spirit box, and one stood out: Lincoln. I became convinced that Lincoln was a servant to the man who originally owned the house. In my mind's eye, I saw a scene unfold, a man rushing down the stairs and yelling at the servant to bring up a bottle of wine. It made me believe the basement, or at least part of it, was once a wine cellar. When I shared this with Xena, she confirmed that the basement had been a wine cellar, something I had no prior knowledge of. I even mentioned wooden walls, thinking it was just my imagination, but Xena told me her parents had removed wooden paneling from the wall. I couldn't believe it. In the story playing out in my mind, Lincoln's boss was a man in his 30s, dressed in a black three-piece suit. While Lincoln and the other servants searched for the wine, I saw a heavy shelf collapse on them. This vision or memory was so detailed that I could even sketch the room's layout. Then there was the piano. It originally belonged to Xena's great-grandmother, but after her death it was passed down to Xena's aunt, who eventually bequeathed it to Xena herself. The piano had also spent time in the church where it was played during funerals. We decided to try contacting her great-grandmother. We bought the piano, a small handheld mirror, and some items that belonged to her into the basement. Things stayed quiet until Xena asked if she could play the piano. Suddenly, the spirit box said no, and we both got full-body chills. I was recording the session on my laptop, but when we fled upstairs to calm down and returned, the video file was missing. After ghost hunting, I went home, but strange things started happening. Whenever I took a shower, I felt like I was being watched. At night, I would hear knocks on my windows and saw a strange orb, like the lingering spot of light you see after staring at something bright. Only this was dark blue, and disappeared when I blinked. I eventually got my own spirit box, and during one session it just said one word: soul. Around that time I began experiencing odd sensations, cold breath down the back of my neck, a strange thought as if my brain were referring to me in the third person. When I visited Xena's house again, I brought the spirit box. We didn't use it until I was about to leave. We turned it on and asked if any spirits were present, and a gravelly, chilling voice responded, "Yes." Since then, things have been quiet. But as we prepare for another ghost hunting session, I can't help but feel both excitement and dread. If you have any advice, tips, or even an explanation, I would love to hear it. When I was in 3rd grade, my mum was a single parent, and we lived in these run-down apartments on the rougher side of town. Each unit had a tiny square yard out back, followed by an alley, and then this massive stone wall. On the other side of that wall, a cemetery. All the apartments were 2 stories, and you could hear everything. The walls were so thin you'd hear the neighbors brushing their teeth or coughing through the night. Our apartment always had this strange energy. Whenever I was downstairs, I'd hear noises upstairs like things moving around. I had a box of marbles, and sometimes it sounded like they were rolling across the tile floor upstairs. There was also a bowling pin I'd gotten for my birthday from a bowling alley, and I swear I'd hear it tip over on its own, but I didn't think much of it. With thin walls, I figured it was just the neighbors or maybe my imagination. Well, one night I was in the living room watching cartoons. My mum was upstairs giving my little sister a bath when I heard something in the kitchen. We didn't have a proper trash can, just a small plastic bag tied to the back door handle for trash. The sound I heard was that bag coming untied. It fell to the floor with a soft thud. "Mom, the trash fell," I yelled. From upstairs, I heard her shout back to me to pick it up. I hesitated though. Something about it felt off. I got up and crept into the kitchen. The light switch, annoyingly, was on the other side of the room near the door. As I made my way in, I suddenly heard this low rumbling sound that made me freeze in my tracks. I knew what it was, the water heater. It was in a little closet next to the kitchen just around the corner, but even knowing what it was, the sound still scared me. It rumbled again, louder this time, and again. I started backing up and moving slowly away, my heart pounding. Then out of nowhere I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was like the whoosh of a stick whipping through the air, and then a clatter. I turned and looked over my shoulder just in time to see a pen rolling across the tile floor. Now when you walked into our kitchen, immediately to the left was the refrigerator, and next to that was a glass table, and right next to that was the little room with the water heater. On the fridge, my mum had this little cup magnet that held pens and pencils. It just hung above the table. I stood there frozen, staring at the pen on the floor. My mind raced. The trash bag had untied itself. I'd heard strange noises, and now a pen had been thrown across the room. Even as a kid, I had tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe my mum hadn't tied the bag that well. Maybe something was in the bag, an animal perhaps, which had caused it to move and fall. But if that were the case, where did it go after the bag hit the floor? Why was there no more noise after it fell? And the pen? If it had just fallen out the cup, it should have landed on the glass table first, making a distinct sound before hitting the floor. But I hadn't heard that. It was as if the pen had been thrown. That night stuck with me. I didn't have any answers then, and honestly, I still don't. This happened just about an hour ago, and my heart is still racing. My girlfriend was fast asleep, and like most nights, I had gotten up to use the bathroom. While I was washing my hands, I heard her call my name from down the hall. At first, I thought she'd woken up, and was wondering where I was. She's a light sleeper, and it's happened before. I called back, just a second, but then I realized something was off. The voice didn't come from her room. It sounded like it came from the kitchen at the other end of the hallway. I tried to dismiss it, thinking maybe her voice had echoed or maybe I'd imagined it, but something about it didn't seem right with me. Like deep down I knew that something was wrong. For context, her house is small. The hallway isn't much of a hallway. It connects the bathroom, kitchen and living room to the bedrooms at the end, and when I stepped out the bathroom and started heading back to her room, I froze. In the corner of the living room near the front door, I saw something. It wasn't human. It was a tall, dark mass, completely still, featureless, just standing there in the shadows watching me. My stomach dropped, and I couldn't move. It didn't make a sound, nor did it shift at all. It was just there in the corner of the room. I don't know how long I stood frozen, but after a few seconds I snapped out of it, and I bolted towards her room, my legs shaking. I quietly shut the door behind me and locked it, trying not to wake her. She was still sound asleep, but I could feel the fear creeping up on me. I sat on the bed trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a shadow, maybe my tired brain playing tricks on me, but I couldn't explain the voice. It sounded exactly like her, calling me from the kitchen, but she had been asleep the entire time. I've had some weird experiences in our house before. It's not exactly haunted, but there's definitely something strange in the air. I can't stop replaying the image of that thing standing in the corner motionless, like it was watching, waiting. Now I'm here lying in bed trying to calm myself down without waking her. I'm not sure what to do. I'm not religious and not particularly spiritual, but whatever that thing was, I feel like I need to do something. I just don't know what. I live in an 1875 New England farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place that, while full of charm, has an undeniable sense of something being off. I thought I'd start documenting the strange things that happened here, despite the fact that it's hard to capture the unsettling atmosphere in anything other than memory. Over the years, I've had a lot of people experience odd things here, and most of them seem strangely comfortable with it. But for me, it's a constant low hum of unease. Here's a quick note. Most of my friends get a weird and uncomfortable vibe when they visit. I've had people tell me without prompt, this isn't a house they'd want to live in, and honestly I get it. The place feels restless, sad, maybe even bitter at times. There's something off about it, and I can't quite put my finger on it. The other night I was in the living room with our dog while my partner was downstairs in the basement. We were just relaxing when we both heard a strange, semi-metallic thud from the corner of the room. It sounded like something solid had dropped to the floor. The dog perked up, looked around, but I brushed it off thinking maybe something had fallen into another room or outside. There was nothing obvious in the corner where the sound had come from. I tried to refocus on my book, but a moment later I was snapped out of it. I distinctly heard a quiet, like someone mulling something over under their breath. I paused. I had smoked a little earlier, so I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and I hesitated before picking up my book again. The dog was still, as though it didn't find the sound unusual. 5 minutes passed, and there it was again. A voice, this time unmistakably male, a low, as though someone was pondering something just outside the room. The refrigerator in the kitchen makes its usual creaks and groans, but that wasn't one of its sounds. I felt a chill. I messaged my partner to come upstairs. I wasn't comfortable being alone with whatever that was. When he came upstairs, I told him what happened, and 3 odd occurrences, all in quick succession. He settled into the living room with me, and for a while it seemed like things had settled. About 15 minutes later, I went to the kitchen to grab a drink. As I barely set the glass down on the counter, I heard it again. "What's wrong?" I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I called back, "What are you talking about?" His voice came from the living room, clear but puzzled. "What's wrong? You just made a noise like you were confused." I walked back to the living room holding my empty glass and asked, "Did it sound like, Did you hear that?" "Yeah, isn't that what you said?" "No, that's what I heard before. And now you heard it too." We'd both heard the same thing, the same voice, the same sound. And after that, it didn't happen again, not once. It left me with a strange feeling, like it had been trying to get our attention, but for what purpose? Then there was a bunch of other things that were puzzling me. When I first moved in over a decade ago, I shoved a bunch of random things under the old cold storage shelving, paint cans, odds and ends, and fake Christmas tree. The lighting in there was poor, and I didn't pay much attention to what I was stashing back there. Not long ago, I decided to see if I had any leftover paint to match a color I needed, and when I moved some things around, I saw it. A small baseball bat standing up on a cylinder block, tucked away in the back. It was odd considering I hadn't placed it there. I didn't remember it being there when I first moved in. I sent a message to the son of the previous owners asking if it was his bat or if it meant something to him. He said no, it wasn't. He never had a baseball bat, and it wasn't something connected to his family. His children were all girls, and the bat didn't belong to any grandchildren either. Now I'm left with this bat sitting under a shelf, oddly placed, and I can't help but wonder, where did it come from? Could it predate the 60s? Could it somehow be tied to the house's past in a way I haven't uncovered yet? It's just one of those strange, inexplicable things that makes me feel like there's more to this house than I've been able to grasp. Something about it doesn't sit right. I'm not sure why it's still there, and every time I look at it, the question only grows. What if the bat is connected to something that's been lingering here for much longer than I've realized? I'm curious if anyone else has experienced anything similar, anything that made them feel that eerie sense of something just off in their home. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Happy 2025. I hope you all have an amazing year ahead. As I said earlier, YouTube has been unsubbing me from an awful lot of you. So I'd very much appreciate it if you would see if you are still subscribed. Most of you probably aren't. I don't know, lots of you aren't getting the notifications anymore. It's a bit of a weird time, not sure what's going on here. Anyway, as always, huge thanks to my members and patrons, and to everyone listening, to be honest. I'm so glad and grateful that you still enjoy my content, and I hope you continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Anyway, that's it from me. Stay awesome, guys, and truly, thank you all so much for being here.